Welcome back. In our commercial break, the president tweeted his information of a new acting chief of staff. And Jeff Bennett, that new acting chief of staff, this is your beat.
Mick Mulvaney. Apparently the president tweeted in the last, 5 minutes or so that he says, I'm pleased to announce that Mick Mulvaney, director of the Office of Management and Budget, will be named acting White House chief of staff, replacing General John Kelly, as we know, is leaving at the end of the month. And then he says, Mick has done an outstanding job while in the administration. Now, this is somebody who already wears a number of hats in the administration. He's the director of Office Management and Budget. Before that, he was a congressman. So this is somebody who potentially could help Donald Trump see around the corners here as the House Democrats take control in January and send a deluge of subpoenas and oversight demands to the West Wing.
Obviously, the word acting is the buzzword there, and who knows who demanded the acting? We don't have any reports.
And remember, Nick Ayers was supposed to be the acting chief of staff, but that blew up over a conversation about the timeline. Nick Ayers didn't want to serve more than a few months in that position. He wanted to go back home to Georgia, and the president wanted a 2-year commitment. So all day we've seen, or all week, frankly, we've seen people take their names off the list of consideration. Mark Meadows, Chris Christie, and so now Mick Mulvaney appears to be the last man standing in this acting
so
capacity.
He's currently budget director, a Senate-confirmed position. He was the acting head of the
Consumer Protection
Financial Board, right? But they have a new head of that. So I guess he was down to one job for a while.
Yeah,
one
he was
job.
like, I need more things to do.
All right, Matthew Continetti, obviously the president's using the word acting. We knew before that acting was the definition of 3 months. I would argue what chief of staff isn't acting, meaning like you serve at the pleasure of one person and one person only. But obviously something tells me that word mattered to one or both of them.
Absolutely, and maybe Mulvaney was reluctant to hold the job on for more than.
But he's supposedly been wanting to seek it for years.
We just don't know. We can only speculate. We do know that he has quite a job ahead of him.
Yes.
And General Kelly was successful when he came in the late summer of 2017.
Was it 1 week or 2 weeks that he had success, and then Charlottesville?
Maybe a month,
and then Charlottesville
right?
happened.
But even after that, maybe a month or so, 2 months, right? There was a period where he had, the flow of information to the president, traditional chief of staff job. Not being able to manage who comes into the Oval Office and who does
Rob
not.
Porter.
And then, of course,
the whole thing seemed to collapse.
In the spring, that collapsed with Porter. So you have to ask, is Mick Mulvaney, is he going to try to reassert the authority of the chief of staff like General Kelly had done with Mick's success? Or is he just going to be basically a facilitator and an advisor to the president?
You know what's been interesting, Danielle, is that Mick Mulvaney in the first 6 months of the administration, was aggressively a public face of the administration, and then suddenly he wasn't. And I didn't understand. I don't know if he made any mistakes. I thought he was actually a pretty good surrogate for this White House compared to other folks that they had put out.
Yeah, I mean, the bar, again, is very low with this administration, but in terms of people who just have sort of a basic level of competency, I may not agree with any of his policies or positions. You can say Mick Mulvaney had that. And he's been there. He's right up front. He can see what's happening in that Oval Office. And so maybe he's the one who demanded the acting, because who wants that job?
Well, Chris Christie takes himself out. Nick Ayers, clearly, I'm not even going to take it. And by the way, I'm leaving for Georgia today. I can understand why this is not an appealing job right now. He's already been through 2. Do we have that picture? I think we were going to do this later in the show, but to control the picture that Reince Priebus tweeted, we were going to tease it like, okay, 1 year from now, who will be the third person in the photo? It was from the White House Christmas party, John Kelly and Reince Priebus here. But this is a pretty thankless job.
It is, as one source put it to us, history has already predetermined the next guy's fate. And this was what a source told us as we were trying to figure out who was in the running to be chief of staff. But clearly anybody, and this used to be the pinnacle of one's career, for Washington politicos, but anybody who has watched the sort of unceremonious departures of John Kelly and Reince Priebus, you see how Donald Trump undercuts these people who he hires, but then when they sort of emerge as an obstacle to him or a rival to his primacy, then all of a sudden they're expendable. So again, perhaps that has something to do with why Mick Mulvaney agreed to do this in an acting capacity. We just don't know yet. But again, there are a number of reasons why anybody gunning for a position like this would have to.
It's possible you could be acting through 2020. I mean, this is
certainly
not
through until January 2020 or so. I mean, even in a typical presidency, the chief of staff's year and a half, I think, is about the average tenure. So this is just accelerated with the atypical presidency of Donald Trump.
Look, I think that the downside of Mick Mulvaney, I mean, it's funny. Daniela, on paper, John Kelly never made sense as a chief of staff, particularly as you gear up for an election. Okay, he's never been in an election campaign. He had some interactions with Congress when he was a military liaison, but let's be realistic, not really the political chops. Mulvaney is actually not somebody that has been involved in national campaigns. You know, he was a congressman from an area that was easy to win, right? So he might not be. So that may be another reason why he's just an acting, that he's not the partner that you need in a re-election year.
Right. I think maybe they're just stalling for time to find, you know, that
See if
person.
anybody else will take it.
Yeah, who will actually say, actually, I'm not going to, you know, I'll put all that other stuff aside, everything that I've seen that's happened over the past couple of months, and I will come in here into this thankless job. And when you're right, you think about John Kelly and Reince Priebus, they walked into the White House with pretty good reputations. Again, I don't agree with any of their policies, but they had good standing, and he just undercut them, and they walk out like it's bad.
For what it's worth, I believe this is the fourth budget director, at least since I've been covering presidents, that has moved from the budget director to the chief of staff. Leanne Panetta was OMB to chief of staff. Josh Bolton went from OMB to chief of staff for George W. Bush. I think Jack Lew was budget director and then ended up as chief of staff. So there is a reason budget directors get picked. Other than chief of staff, you touch every part of the federal government. So Mick Mulvaney has a familiarity with every aspect of the federal government. So as for being the conductor, he's perfectly he's got the perfect job to learn.
Right, and it's also true that the short list wasn't all that long. So White House officials we talked to really waved us off the notion that Jared Kushner was ever a serious contender.
Bossie seemed to be the front runner like an hour ago. For what it's worth.
But again, inside the West Wing, he was seen as a polarizing figure, and that he never really won over Jared and Ivanka, who you need to win over in order to be chief of staff, we're told.
Well, now we know why Chris Christie didn't get the
No, there's one chief of staff, there's one director of communications, there's one political director in this White House, and they are all named Donald J. Trump.
Yep.
Yeah, pure and simple.
That's it.
He is better off. This might be what it's an acting chief of staff, but you know what? His office will be in the Eisenhower building where OMB is. Anyway. All right, guys.
This Fox News alert, President Trump just tweeting that Mick Mulvaney, who is his OMB director and the head of the CFPB, will serve as his acting chief of staff. So not a permanent chief of staff, but Mick Mulvaney, who I think many of you might know of. He was a congressman from South Carolina. Juan, your thoughts about Mick Mulvaney taking over, just to see them through?
Well, I mean, the big news before this, Dana, was that Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, said he was taking himself out. And we've seen a series of people say, no, I'm not going to do it. It's a difficult job, and it looks like the coming 2 years are going to be turbulent. I think a lot of people moved away. So Mick Mulvaney is really taking one on for the team.
Yeah, now he has 3 jobs, Jesse.
Yeah, I mean, I
It's a
would
lot of
not,
work.
being Trump's chief of staff, my mother recommended I not do that. So now, like Christie, I will be taking myself out of consideration for that.
Good job,
role.
Jesse.
Like I said before, I think it's all about personal chemistry with the president. And it looks like
They have a good
Mick has a
relationship.
nice relationship, and he could steer the course in the next, I don't know how long it's going to take to get a permanent one, maybe 2 weeks, a month. But I don't think that a lot of the people's names that were being bandied about, like Chris Christie and David Bossie, were actually in serious consideration.
And now the president gets to go into the weekend with a little bit of news that story, we're going to take it off the page for the front.
Yeah, I guess I'm not interested in staffing changes as much as I guess I'm supposed to be. I just see people go in and go out.
It's a little bit of a Washington parlor game.
Exactly. I really don't get. And watching some people I won't mention, Santorum, claiming that they were up and then they're not up. It's just like
floating their names.
Floating their names. I mean, come on. Come on.
Emily?
Just to point out for viewers that the limit on acting on the role of an acting position, there's limits to that. But when the fact that the president appointed him or nominated him or whatever, that.
But in the chief of staff role, you could be acting for a long time.
Exactly, and so that's it. It makes it indefinite. So it could be, like you said, it could be a week and a month. It could be clearly,
He looks
or
like
it could
he's
be
acting
longer
pretty
than
angry
that.
right now. Is that him after he found out he was
my
chief
God.
of staff?
That's a live shot, actually.
But he had said
He's impersonating Pence.
Mick Mulvaney had said that he was not interested in that position, that he likes the jobs that he has, or would even consider a cabinet position. But the chief of staff role is a good. I think he'd make a good chief of staff, and maybe he'll get in there and decide that it's pretty good. You're the gatekeeper for the president.
The most interesting possibility had been Jared Kushner, that if he had brought in Jared, because remember, what happened was that the previous chief of staff was said to be on the outs with Jared and Ivanka. But now, I don't know what Mulvaney's relationship is.
Well, he's a very smart guy, and I think he's well liked.
And also, they're headed into budget season, so it's a good time to have the president's here. Okay.
We have some very exciting breaking news. President Trump made a decision on his chief of staff, at least temporarily. Just tweeting this out moments ago, I'm pleased to announce that Mick Mulvaney, director of the Office of Management and Budget, will be named acting White House chief of staff. Acting, notice that word, replacing General John Kelly, who has served our country with distinction. Mick has done an outstanding job while in the administration. I look forward to working with him in this new capacity as we continue to make America great again. John will be staying until the end of the year. He is a great patriot, and I want to personally thank him for his service. Now, I should mention, Mick Mulvaney has two very important jobs. One, he's the head of OMB, Office of Management and Budget. He deals with that $3.5 trillion monstrosity known as our national budget. The other thing he does is handle the Bureau of Consumer Financial Affairs. This is the bureau that was started by Liz Warren, and in itself is a bureaucratic monstrosity by some accounts. But he handles both of these organizations. He's done so pretty well. So, gang, what do you think about moving him over to chief of staff?
First off, what he was running monstrosity is being nice. Look, I like the guy. I love his interviews. He knows his stuff. I just have one simple message to the man. Discipline. The White House needs discipline. It needs better, consistent messaging. And good luck.
He's known as the Axe Man. He's all about cutting in government spending. His personality is always what gets me. He seems so upbeat. So I'm curious how he's going to drive home a hard message, control everything, and then still have that smile. Will he have that smile when he eventually is done as chief of staff? And then who replaces him at OMB?
OMB or the other organization, the Bureau of Financial Affairs. Go ahead, Danielle.
I'm curious to see what I would have loved to have seen Elizabeth Warren's reaction to this appointment. But not to be a wet bag of mice. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer for a minute, but we have to recall a big survey came out yesterday that showed that 48.6% of chief financial officers in this country believe we're going into recession in 2019. What better person to have as your right-hand man than Mick Mulvaney? He has a deep understanding, experience. Prior to going into government, he had experience in business and real estate. You want somebody who has a great foundation, understands the economy, understands how businesses work if the U.S. economy is truly heading into a slowdown.
So I'll say something else kind about him. He also has experience in electoral politics, actually more than the president has, and that's a good thing in this role. But we need to keep in mind the president has chewed up and spit out anyone in this job before, and he will do the same thing to Mick Mulvaney. I would say Mick Mulvaney is the patriot for taking on this this assignment.
Well, there's another patriot that we're going to bring on right now, a guy who works for us, Chad Pergram, who's the senior Capitol Hill producer, a guy who knows everything about what goes on inside the Beltway. His name, Chad, had been put forward by a number of different people, but everybody thought he's so indispensable where he is with the OMB and with the Liz Warren monstrosity, as I keep calling it. I mean, how can he be replaced?
I had been getting some very subtle hand signals for some time now that he might be in the offing to be the chief of staff, now going to be the acting chief of staff. He knows Capitol Hill. He has strong relations with the House Freedom Caucus, the arch conservative group up here on Capitol Hill, which he helped found when he was a Republican congressman from South Carolina. And you know, this is key. You know, if we're going to go into this potential government shutdown a week from now, having someone as conservative as Mick Mulvaney, who's tied with the Freedom Caucus, that could spark a shutdown right there if he's whispering in the president's ear. Yeah, this is something that folks on the left and people who are opposed to the wall certainly won't like, but he does know his way around Capitol Hill, which is something that the president is definitely going to need.
I want to move on the shutdown. I've gone through the past, going back to the 70s. The most, I think 21 days was the most. The average is 1 to 3 days. Do you have a feel on whether in the back channels things are coming together to where they can get something done, and if there is a shutdown, it'll end very quickly?
Well, we got a little bit of a tip this afternoon that there might be some behind-the-scenes negotiating on a 2-week interim spending bill to get them through Christmas, get them through the new year when the Democrats take over the House of Representatives on January 3rd. This would go to January 4th. But that seems to be dead in the water. First of all, there was one top Democratic aide who said to me, well, that means that President Trump loses twice. He doesn't get his wall in December, and he's certainly not going to get it in January. You're right about the length of these government shutdowns. We've never quite had a government shutdown with a new Congress coming in. We have had them over the holidays, though. In 1995, December, into early 1996, they had a partial government shutdown. There was a series of 3 in this big standoff between President Clinton and then House Speaker Newt Gingrich. But each time they had one of those shutdowns, they opened up a little more of the government. They passed some appropriations bills. So this could be a similar model to what we saw in late 95 and 96.
Chad, what do you make of the messaging of this shutdown? You know, we had one back in January, and if you ask me, the Republicans messaged and owned that shutdown very effectively. But this time the president wants to take credit for it instead of blaming the Democrats in their messaging. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, a few weeks ago, President Trump said to incoming House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, if she needs the votes, I can help her out. Well, after that meeting at the White House on Tuesday, guess what? He helped her out. If there was any question among Democrats that she didn't have the juice to be Speaker of the House after that meeting, she picked up the extra votes there.
But let me just throw in a couple of things to be contrarian here. One is that markets have actually done pretty well. The last 3 government shutdowns, markets have reacted positively during the duration of the shutdown. The last time the market was up 3%. The other thing is that there was a big shutdown recently that happened just before a midterm election. And even though Republicans had been targeted as responsible for the shutdown, they won that election. So the argument can be made that the shutdown might not be political kryptonite, right?
Right. And sometimes, you know, we're at the furthest point away right now from the next election. You know, we are 23 months. So if you're going to have a shutdown, who remembers? You referenced the shutdown in 2013 over defunding Obamacare. Well, guess what? The Republicans won control of the Senate.
Exactly.
But here's the key thing. I wonder what the optics are going to look like. You know, if the government is shut down and the president has said, I'm going to take the mantle, you can imagine the political cartoonists, you know, the Grinch who stole Christmas, you know, a heart 2 sizes too small, all of the different narratives that play into the holidays there. The Democrats will eat that up, especially since the president already.
And by the way, when I saw them in the
I'll play
White
contrarian. Oh, Gary, I'll play contrarian to that. I think the voters who support President Trump, I think he's fine with this because he's carrying through on a campaign promise that he shouted about at his rallies. He's going to build that wall, and if he can't, and whatever that means, by the way, because $1 billion, $5 billion, who cares? I just don't think his voters are going to blame him for that.
And you're right, and that's an interesting point. You know, and I talked to one very senior conservative congressman yesterday who said, you know, he's always going to be stuck in the 40s, so he probably doesn't care. Here's the flip side of that. There have been a lot of Republicans in the House of Representatives who have said that they didn't think that the GOP got the message of the midterm election, losing control of the House of Representatives, because this type of issue and that kind of braggadocio and confrontational politics, that works in red America. But in, you know, these suburban districts, especially with female voters, the fights over the wall, that doesn't work out. And that's why they think that they are whistling past the graveyard in the postmortem of what happened in the midterm elections, especially among House Republicans.
Chad, what if we get a deal for a wall and something for DACA and Dreamers? Does that get us what both sides want? Can they agree to that?
I specifically asked House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi that a week and a half ago, and I I said, what if you got you know, a DACA deal, a permanent bona fide deal for some degree of wall money? And she was emphatic. She said, absolutely not. I think she believes she has the upper hand here. At that point, she said these issues are not connected, and especially since the president, you know, took claim, you know, there's no reason for her to deal. You know, one might wonder how much this does hamstring her in early January when they get control of the House of Representatives. I asked Pelosi that yesterday, and she said, well, how long would this shutdown go on? Would it go on forever? And that's why some people think maybe there's this back channel effort to put out this fire pretty quickly and at least have an interim spending bill to avoid a shutdown at Christmas.